All right, guys, welcome back to another episode here at the Final Round HQ. Another fighter profile. Today, we're going to go over one of the very best super bantamweights to ever live. This guy, Daniel Zaragoza, Mexican legend. Now, obviously, when we talk about the great Mexican legends in boxing, there's Canelo, Chavez, Sanchez. There's been so many over the years, but you know, real hardcore boxing fans will notice picture. Oh man, Daniel Zaragoza was really good. He was I believe a two division champion. I'm not believe. I was trying to look earlier and see if he was a three division champion because he did compete a couple. I don't. He did compete at I think 115 at the start of his career, but no, he was a two division world champion, um, and I believe he competed in one, two. Let's see, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, um, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. 22 world title fights. It's a lot. 22 world title fights in a career that spanned, I believe, 17 years. He made his pro debut in 1980. Wasn't and this was back in the day when most Mexican fighters would do what Julio Chavez did, and this was around the time that Chavez also was making his rise in the 80s. Um, he made his debut in 1980 in October, and he won a bunch of his first fights. He did lose to a fighter named Harold Petty, who was a pretty good bantamweight fighter in his time. He had a pretty good. I don't know if he ever won a world title, but he did fight some good guys. He felt like he fought Jorge Diaz. He was really good for a number of years. Greg Richardson was really good. Is the guys that he fought. I don't think he ever. He never fought for a world title, but he was a pretty good. Um, he was a pretty good bantamweight back in the 80s, and he was the first loss of Zaragoza's career in 1982. It was a unanimous decision. It was actually his first fight. It was his second fight in America, where he lost. Okay. Um, in context. But yeah, no, he continued his march. Came back from the loss, fought good, and then he had a rematch against Harold Petty in '83. He lost that again, so he lost two to this guy. But was still making it. And this was this was back in the '80s, and he was fighting for the Mexican bantamweight title, which he seems like he held for a number of years. Um, and he kept on winning fights. And then in 1985, he made his first attempt. Um, where the hell is that? Sorry, I'm trying to figure out what country this was in. His first world title shot was in Aruba. I was like, I saw the of Orangista. Like, where the hell is that? It was in Aruba. Promoter Don King. Now that's 80s boxing right there for you. And this was the 80s when Don King's hand in the 90s when his hand was in every single pot. So it makes sense. Having a friend in Aruba makes sense. He fought Fred Jackson, who was a pretty decent fighter. They fought for the vacant WBC World Bantamweight title. He actually won that by DQ. Jackson was DQ because of a headbutt. Unfortunately, that caused that fight to he won by DQ. He then lost to Miguel Lara by decision. He was a very good Colombian fighter for a number of years. He was actually really good. After he beat um, Zaragoza, who at the time was 28-2. He went on and he beat Wilfredo Vasquez, who himself was a great Puerto Rican legend, a great world champion. Um, and he went on to be WBC Bantamweight Champion for, I believe, the next for at least the next 5 years. Um, and he had a great career as well. So after that, he made his first fight at super bantamweight against Jeff Fennick. Fennick himself was a very good fighter himself. 29-3-1 his whole career. He fought a number of great fighters. Muzuma Nelson, Mario Martinez, Tyrone Downs. I mean, he fought everybody at featherweight, and he was a great lower weight. Jeff Fennick was probably one of the better lower weight fighters of the '80s. He was really really good. Didn't really come to massive prominence until the late '80s and early '90s. But he was good. He was a very very good fighter for a number of years. Um, and Zaragoza suffered his third loss to him by unanimous decision. But he kept on fighting. He then beat Mike Ayala, who was a good fighter at the time. More of kind of not a journeyman, but kind of a mid-level contender at super bantamweight. He knocked him out in 7 rounds. Beat Aaron Lopez. He was pretty good. Daryl Thigpen. Oh my god, that guy was not a good fighter. Yeah, there's a famous story about him and a player. He was a staple in Texas for a number of years in boxing. There's a story about him and a Cowboys player. I won't go into it here. NFL fan and Car Gordon fans know about that one. I probably just make it because I read a book about it, but but then he finally got a chance at the WBC Super Bantamweight title when he took on Carlos Zarate, who at the time his career record was 66-3. It's a lot of fights. He beat him by 10th round TKO in 1988. He then had a draw against Sung Hoon Lee, which was in South Korea at the time. Probably, yeah. This was around the time, I believe, of the '88 Seoul Olympics, where famously Roy Jones Jr. was horrifically robbed. So I don't think the judging at the time in South Korea is anything to be given any credit. So I'm just gonna assume that he probably won that fight. I'm just gonna I'm not saying that I haven't seen that fight. I've done research about it, but I'm assuming that there was something. 1988 judging in South Korea, very fishy. So I'm just gonna say that he probably won that fight, but the judges gave it a draw. Makes a lot of sense considering what happened to Roy Jones Jr. in that same year. But he kept his title, beat Valerio Nati by knockout, but then had the first of 3 fights with Paul Banque. He was a pretty good American fighter. He was an interesting guy. He really wasn't he was sort of the California kind of the tan Californian kid. He was really not beloved by media, but it was clear that when he fought Zaragoza, I believe it was CBS. CBS clearly wanted Bunker to win the fight. And at the time, he was a good fighter, but he had lost to sort of kind of mid-level guys early in his career, and wasn't a bad fighter, but really wasn't great. And he got beat by Zaragoza in their first fight. He lost by split decision to Zaragoza. Zaragoza went on to beat Frankie Duarte, Chung Young Park, won those fights by TKO and then split decision, respectively. And then had the second fight with Paul Banque, which was in Meninglewood, California, the same place as their first fight. And he actually lost by 9 on TKO. Their second fight was actually really, really good. It was a back and forth fight. I believe at the time of the stoppage, I believe he was up on the cards severely. Yeah, he was up on the cards hugely in the fight on Daniel Zaragoza. This fight was in 1990. I believe it was on. I don't know if they were the main event. They probably were, but yeah, it was a Tony Willis. Wow, that's a classic name. Forgot about him. But yeah, that was the second fight. It was actually a pretty good fight. I don't think it's on like free fights, but if you guys can find that fight, that's a great back and forth war. This picture right here of him covered in blood, I think is from his fight against. No, I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think of the guy who I think it's him against his fight against his 2 fights against Tracy Harris Patterson. I'm pretty sure that's what it's from. But I'll get to that in a second. But yeah, no. And yeah, so he lost to Paul Banque, and then I think he lost to Kiyoshi Hatanaka, and then Zaragoza fought Hatanaka. He beat him by a split decision to regain his title. So I think at this point he became a 3-time champion, I believe. Because I think he was I think a 3-time champion. Obviously a 2-time champion at Super Bantamweight. And then went on not his last run, but his second reign. Didn't last super long. He had 1 defense against Jun Hu. Beat him by decision, and then had the third fight in Inglewood against Paul Banque, and was able to win that fight by decision. The third fight was also very good, and this was back when you had I don't believe so. I think some of his early fights were 15 rounds, weren't they? Or no? No, okay, yeah, all his fights were 12. Because back in the 80s, you did some fights that were 15 rounds scheduled, but I don't think he actually had. Yeah, it took a here that he didn't actually have 15-round fights, so I was just checking that. I didn't know if that was still around back in the 80s. I know around the late 80s that was kind of fading. But yeah, so he got revenge, or beat Paul Banque in the rubber match. Buck was a good fighter, but he was tough, and he was a rough brawl. He was a good fighter though. And then his next fight, he lost to Thierry Jacob, a French fighter who, was a pretty good fighter. He was a southpaw. I think that's why he lost. And this was back in the 80s and 90s when really no coach knew how to deal with southpaw. Like, unless you're with like Emmanuel Stewart or someone at that time who was like a genius, most great coaches couldn't figure out a southpaw to the point where you could like really beat them. I mean, coaches could figure out ways to to get around it or to combat them or stave off something. But most of the time, like, they were just like, crap, southpaw, we're gonna lose. And then so then he lost that fight. He then fought for the same title against Tracy Harris Patterson, which was a draw. He then got another fight against Tracy Harris Patterson, because I think the fight where this is from, where he's covered in blood, I think it's the first fight, which was in France. The second fight was actually no, it was actually probably, sorry. The second fight was this one. It was actually a great back and forth fight for 7 rounds. As you can see here, he had a terrible cut over his eye, and the fight was actually stopped after the 7th round because of the cut of Zaragoza's eye. He wasn't very happy. I remember watching the highlights when I was doing research for this video, and he wasn't very happy about that. And then yeah, he got back some wins. So that was his second reign as champion, or at that for the WBC bantamweight title. Um, and he had some good fought a bunch of like mediocre guys, or not mediocre. He fought a lot of crappy guys for the next couple years, and then in 1995 he got a chance to fight for the same title against Hector Acero Sanchez. He, what the hell? Am I looking at that? Oh yeah, he fought him at Foxwoods Resort in Mashantucket. That's Connecticut, baby. CT. I'm from Mass, so I know exactly where Mashantucket is. Been there a bunch of times. Um, and so yeah, he had that fight, another draw. Um, but he got the immediate rematch 5 months later against Sanchez. He won by split decision this time, and then became a three-time WBC Super Bantamweight Champion and a four-time champion himself. And then he had his third and final reign as Super Bantamweight, and this was when he started to get some real recognition from the boxing media. As, and I think at the time he was, when he won the title in 1995, he was 37 years old. He was 37. He wasn't like, or he might have been 36. No, he was 37. Yeah, he was 50. He was when he had the draw against Sanchez. Because when he had the first, yeah, no, because when he beat him for in the second fight, he was 37, a career record of 57-3. A lot. That's a lot of fights. And honestly, you think like, okay, his final record 55, 8-3. You think, okay, but when you have 22 of those fights for a title, 22 title fights, because what 55 plus, I can't do math. It's probably what 60, 63 plus the 3, so it's 66 pro fights, right? 66 pro fights. 22 of those. That's a third. Pretty much a third of your fights are for world titles. That's pretty good. And then yeah, so then he beat Joitiro Tadayoshi. He beat him by 11 round TKO. That was a good fight. He actually fought the same guy again in 1997. In the final one of his career, which is actually a great fight. It's one of it's a very great fight in Osaka, Japan. He then after the first time he beat Tachiyoshi, he beat Tsuyoshi Harada. He beat him by TKO, and then he fought undefeated American Wayne McCullough. Actually, I don't. Oh yeah. Wayne McCullough was actually from Belfast, Northern Ireland, but he was. I'm living in America at the time, and it was viewed as sort of an American fighter. He was 20-0, and that was. If boxing fans know of Wayne McCullough, he was pretty good, but he really was a guy who, he was a good featherweight fighter for a number of years. Fought, super bantamweight for a number of years. I'm lost to Prince Nassim Hamed. I believe back in '98, yeah, for the featherweight title. But at the time when he was coming up, he had won the WBC World Bantamweight title in 1995, and was viewed as a rising star in boxing, and it was a close fight. I think at the time he was young. McCullough was 26, was young, up and coming, former bantamweight champion, was on the rise, and Zaragoza beat him by split decision. Yeah, and it was like, okay, he's at the time, I think he might have been 39 at the time, or he probably still was 36, but the fact that he was able to at 38, 39 years old, beat a guy at 26. Very impressive. He then beat Tachiyoshi again by decision in the last one of his career. And then, I mean, boxing fans might know of him from his last fight, which was truly a changing of the guard fight with one of the greatest Mexican fighters who has ever lived, and that is El Terrible Eric Morales. And Eric Morales, what I know and he, now I think Zaragoza's legacy, obviously in Mexico and among that community, he is known as a great legendary champion, for sure. But over the American boxing community knows Eric Morales is a great Mexican champion. They don't talk about Zaragoza much because in in the mid to late '80s and even the '90s, lower weight fighters weren't really that renowned. I mean, you had Salvador Sanchez, but Salvador Sanchez didn't really gain a lot of credibility until after he was dead. To be honest with you, I mean, so many of the great lower weight fighters. I mean, one of the one of the greatest lower weight fighters of my generation. I Chocolatito. I'm Roman Gonzalez. He's talked about it that like he thinks that like if he had, and he's mentioned Zaragoza. He said like if Zaragoza fought today, he'd be just as renowned as me. Um, so I think like at the time when Zaragoza was making his fourth title reign, his third at Super Bantamweight, he was in his late 30s, and even though he was winning fights and beating young guys, it was and as soon as he ran into a guy like as great as Wayne McCullough was a good fighter, he was never a great fighter. He finished his career like 27-7, which means in his last 14 fights, in his last 14 fights, he went 7-7, which that's not great. It's not terrible, but most were title fights, but still, he didn't go on to have a career of like 30 wins and 2 defeats. And so obviously, when he fought Eric Morales, I believe it was September of 1997. Morales was 21 years old. 21. So Zaragoza was literally 18 years his senior. I mean, like, he pretty much could have been Eric Morales' dad, honestly. Never know Mexico. I'm just kidding. But no, and it was in El Paso, which was, even though it's in America, it's a very Hispanic, El Paso, a lot of connections with Mexico, of course. And I believe that fight was on HBO, and it was a great fight. Zaragoza was doing well, but he was old. He was 39 years old, and the fact that he was fighting a 21-year-old Eric Morales who was 26-0 and was going crazy and was clearly a fighter. I mean, if you look at Eric Morales the next 6 years after that, or sorry, next 10 years, he had the trilogy with Marco Antonio Barrera, which is, I think overall, it's definitely in the top 10 trilogies of all time. It could even be top 5. It's a great trilogy. I know, if you ask Jim Lampley, that's definitely that is 100% in Jim Lampley's top 5. But it's a great trilogy. He had a great trilogy with Manny Pacquiao. He fought Marcos Maidana when he was, and Eric Morales is someone who sort of not exactly did what Zaragoza did, whereas like late in his 30s have a sort of resurgence where he gets back a title and becomes another reigning titleist and has some big wins. Morales did a sort of similar thing where he sort of got back, had a great, fight against Marcos Maidana where he took a stand against him, and he lost. He gave a great account of himself at that point of his career, like 4 or 5 years removed from his real prime against Pacquiao and Barrera, and it was a massive he had a massive great career, and I think Zaragoza unfortunately gets lost in that because people will most fans only remember him for if you're a boxing fan, you'll probably remember him from his 3 fights with Paul Banque, which were I believe all on CBS or something like that. And then his changing of his changing of the guard fight with Merrick Morales, and you know it was truly. I think Larry Merchant mentioned something at the end of the fight. He goes, "It's not really a sad death of a king, but more of the passing of a torch, or but more of the passing of a torch to a junior, yeah, to a new generation." And it was Zaragoza and Eric Morales. They stayed friends throughout the years, and they did something on Mexican TV where they were like talking about their fight and stuff like that. And Zaragoza has remained a very influential member in the Mexican boxing community for years, and he is truly a legendary Mexican champion. And I just wanted to give this video a chance to recognize him. I was actually watching some Eric Morales videos, and I was thinking, hold on, didn't he beat Daniel Zaragoza for his first title? And I went back and I looked, and I said, yeah, and I didn't know. Now me, I got introduced to Zaragoza actually for watching I think his third fight with Paul Blanca. I think the first, I was going for a bunch of old fights in the '80s, and I found that on an old vault. And, watch the fight, a pretty good fight. And then I went and watched their second fight. It's a pretty good trilogy. Obviously not anywhere near Barrera and Morales trilogy, not anywhere near that, but still a pretty good trilogy of fights. And it's just unfortunate that he gets lost in things, as I said, more because of in the 80s and 90s, lower weight fighters really weren't given the credit they deserve, because back in the 80s and 90s, it was all the heavyweights. And as you guys know, I'm the biggest Marvin Hagler fan in the world. I love Hagler to death. Rest in peace, champ. I mean, his picture is right here on my wall, right above the computer, right here. So he's the best. But I think Hagler and the Fab Four really benefited from the fact that even though Larry Holmes was the heavyweight champion, once Larry started to once Larry lost to Michael Spinks in '85, or '84 or whatever, no one really cared until Tyson got all three belts and started really dominating. No one really cared for like 2 or 3 years, and that's when the Fab Four really became huge. They were already big, but once Ali left, heavyweight was put on the back burner. And then when Tyson came back, it became, the absolute big thing until probably the mid to late 90s. And that's when you saw guys like Eric Morales, Antonio Barrera, Pacquiao, Juan Manuel Marquez, Nassim Hamed to some degree get more stature. And Zaragoza, even though he got the credit at the end of his career, he didn't get much credit in the mid to late 80s because it was televised, but it probably wasn't that big of a attraction back then because it was a bunch of small guys fighting, and it wasn't really a massive appeal. And obviously you have the Mexican fans, but I'm talking about the general huge American audience, the audience that Dana White at the UFC has been trying to get to for years, and he keeps kidding himself and saying that he has it. He doesn't have it. He has it on a Saturday, depending on who's fighting. It's not every week. It's not every day. It's not. But he wants to say it is. Being on ESPN, isn't it? Being on ESPN, and I'll go into this in a different video. I was going to record it tonight. I probably won't. But me and Isaiah are going to do a breakdown of UFC 319 tomorrow, probably. And we're gonna try to do a live thing for the Contender Series. We'll see the whole thing, but I'm gonna mention to him that I think that Dana's kind of kidding himself, that he thinks that he can get to a point where CBS was in the 80s and 90s, where boxing was everywhere, and it was everywhere because it was marketable, because of Tyson and all this stuff, and then you had all these other guys from the lower weights come up who were marketable. I'm not saying that Zaragoza wasn't marketable, but he was, he was a great fighter, but he just unfortunately happened to fight most of his career in an era where low weight fighters were taken for granted. So unfortunately, he gets a little unfairly maligned for that. Not maligned, but forgotten. And want to make this video to give Daniel Zaragoza his credit for being one of the greatest Mexican fighters ever, and having a great career at bantamweight and especially at super bantamweight. He was a great legendary champion, and his fight with Morales is truly how a changing of the guard fight should go, where the older guy puts in a good fight, the younger guy starts hitting him, beating him down and stuff, and that's how it should go. And that's how it went for him. And Eric Morales wanted to have an unbelievable career, and so but yeah, that is the fighter profile on Daniel Zaragoza. Thanks for watching, guys. My name is Jake, and remember, the greatest fighters always leave it all in the final round. I'll tell you, Daniel Zaragoza definitely did. See you guys.